3 a.m., I found nude photos of him with her. Her message said, "Tonight he's all mine," and I could hardly breathe as I realized something terrible. Before we start, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you don't want to miss stories like this one.
It started with a sound so small, it shouldn't have meant anything. A short vibration on Mark's phone at 2 a.m. Claire barely noticed it at first. She turned over in bed, eyes half closed, ready to drift back to sleep. But then it buzzed again. Mark was a heavy sleeper. His phone lay on the nightstand, its screen lighting the room in pale blue. Claire's tired eyes caught a few words flashing across the preview line. "Still thinking about last night." At first she didn't move. She just stared at those words until her pulse began to pound in her ears. Then curiosity, or maybe fear, took over. She reached for the phone, opened it with the code she had known for years. The screen unlocked easily. Messages filled the display, dozens of them, stretching back weeks. The name at the top read Isabella. The first thing Claire noticed was the tone. Playful, intimate, nothing that belonged between co-workers. The second was the picture. A dimly lit hotel room, a glass of wine, a reflection in a mirror that clearly wasn't hers. Her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she thought she might faint. She locked the phone, placed it back exactly as she'd found it, and lay down again. She didn't sleep a second more that night. The morning sunlight felt cruel when it came. At breakfast, Mark was cheerful as always, scrolling through the news while sipping his coffee. "You're quiet today," he said. "Didn't sleep much," Claire replied. She kept her tone steady. "Work stress again?" "Something like that." He smiled, reached to squeeze her hand, and for a second she wanted to believe she had imagined everything. But the words, "still thinking about last night," replayed in her head until her stomach turned. She spent the day pretending she didn't see the signs she'd ignored for months. The late meetings, the sudden interest in gym sessions, the way he guarded his phone like a second wallet. By evening, the pretending broke. She couldn't sit still, couldn't breathe right. When Mark left for another client dinner, she followed his car at a distance. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel the whole time. He drove across town to the small boutique hotel near the river. The parking lot was almost empty. Claire waited in the shadows and watched him step out, check his phone, and smile in a way she hadn't seen in years. A few minutes later, Isabella appeared, younger, confident, laughing softly as she wrapped her arms around him. They disappeared inside together. Claire sat in her car for an hour, watching the hotel lights flicker through her tears. She didn't cry loudly. It was the silent kind of crying that empties you out. When she finally drove home, she didn't remember the turns she took. Inside the house, everything looked the same. The framed vacation photo, the half-burned candle, the jacket he'd left on the chair, but nothing felt familiar anymore. She stood in the middle of the living room and whispered, "You're not the man I married." Her voice sounded foreign, like someone else's. That night, when Mark came home smelling faintly of perfume, she didn't ask anything. She just watched him move around, casual and unbothered, and realized how easily people can live double lives when the other person refuses to see. When he finally fell asleep, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at him, wondering if she should wake him up and end everything right there. But then another thought crept in. Darker, quieter, more dangerous. If he could lie this easily, maybe she could too. And that thought didn't leave her. The next morning, Claire acted as though nothing had changed. She smiled when Mark kissed her cheek, laughed faintly at his morning jokes, and waved from the porch as he drove off to work. The moment his car turned the corner, her face dropped. Every part of her wanted to scream, but she forced herself to stay calm. She needed to think. Confronting him now would just give him space to twist the truth, to call her paranoid, emotional, or confused. No, she wanted him cornered with no way to lie. So, she began collecting her own quiet evidence. She started with his shirts. She checked every pocket, every fold. Twice she found receipts: a hotel bar charge, a wine purchase, both dated on nights he'd claimed to be working late. Once, she found a folded napkin with the words, "Can't wait next time, I," written in cursive lipstick. Each discovery burned like acid, but she said nothing. That weekend, Mark suggested a relaxing night in. He cooked pasta, poured wine, made small talk. It was almost enough to make her forget for a few hours. But later, when he leaned over to kiss her, she could still smell the faint trace of perfume that wasn't hers. She turned her face away. "Headache," she murmured. He looked disappointed, but not suspicious. By the following week, she couldn't stand being home while he was gone. The silence of the house made her thoughts louder. So, one afternoon, she drove to the boutique hotel. She told herself she was only going to see it once more, to make sure she hadn't imagined what she'd seen. But when she walked into the lobby, the receptionist recognized Mark's name immediately. "Oh yes," she said, smiling politely. "Mr. Reynolds has a regular booking on Thursdays." Claire froze. "I'm his wife," she said quietly. The receptionist's smile vanished. "Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't." But Claire wasn't listening anymore. Her ears were ringing. She turned and left before the woman could say another word. Out in the parking lot, she stood beside her car, shaking. She wasn't even angry at that moment. She was hollow. She thought about how many times she'd made dinner alone, how many times he'd said "I love you" before leaving for meetings. All of it had been lies. That night, when Mark came home, Claire watched him like a stranger. He sat on the couch, scrolled through his phone, and asked what she wanted for dinner. She said nothing, just nodded occasionally, memorizing every detail of his calm, guiltless expression. He looked so normal, so practiced. Later, when he fell asleep, she took his phone again. This time she didn't stop at reading. She downloaded every message thread, every picture, every little memory he'd shared with Isabella. Then she sent them to her own email. If he could cheat, she could plan. Over the next few days, she became the actress of her own story. She laughed, cooked, texted him sweetly, all while preparing something behind the scenes. Her calm terrified even her reflection in the mirror. She began to text Isabella from a new number, pretending to be Mark. The woman responded instantly. The messages were flirtatious, familiar, dripping with overconfidence. Claire felt disgust twist in her chest, but she kept going. She wrote, "Can't wait to see you again. Let's meet Thursday. Same hotel." The reply came seconds later. "Of course, baby. I'll wear what you like." Claire stared at the message for a long time, then whispered to herself, "Good. Let's make this your last meeting." That Thursday, she packed a small bag, dressed neatly, and waited for the clock to hit 7. Mark left, same as always, claiming he had a late conference call. 10 minutes later, Claire followed. When she reached the hotel, she parked at the corner, near the same window she had watched before. This time she wasn't shaking. She wasn't crying, she was ready. The hotel's parking lot looked the same as it always did. Quiet, dim, and deceitfully peaceful. Claire waited in her car with the engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel. The faint sound of rain tapping on the roof gave her something steady to focus on. At 7:42 p.m., Mark's car appeared. He parked near the entrance, checked his reflection in the mirror, and fixed his shirt collar. A few seconds later, Isabella's silver sedan pulled up next to him. Claire felt the now familiar burn in her throat, but she didn't cry. Instead, she started the recorder on her phone and zoomed in, capturing them greeting each other, the way they laughed, touched, and disappeared inside the same room. This wasn't about heartbreak anymore. It was about truth, hard, undeniable, and final. She waited 15 minutes before stepping out. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement glistening under yellow streetlights. She walked through the lobby with her head high and her wedding ring still on. The same receptionist looked up, startled. "Mrs. Reynolds?" "Room 214, Claire said calmly. "Ma'am, I can't just—" Claire's stare made her stop mid-sentence. 2 minutes later, Claire stood outside room 214. Her hand hovered over the handle. She could hear muffled laughter inside, faint music, a woman's voice. Isabella's. She pushed the door open. The world seemed to slow. Mark was half-dressed, his face drained of color as he froze mid-motion. Isabella gasped, clutching the bedsheet around herself. For a moment, no one spoke. Only the low hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. Then Claire took out her phone and pressed play. The recording, their voices, their laughter from outside, echoed in the room. "Claire." "Wait!" Mark began, stepping forward. She lifted her hand. "Don't. Every word, every lie. I've got all of it." His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Isabella stammered. "I didn't know." Claire laughed, sharp and hollow. "Didn't know? You texted him about our anniversary dinner? You knew." She dropped her phone on the table and walked toward the door. Her voice was steady, but her hands were trembling. "You both deserve each other." Mark followed her, pleading. "Please, Claire, listen. It wasn't— Don't touch me." Her voice cracked only once, right at the end. She stepped into the hallway, leaving the door wide open behind her. Every pair of eyes she passed on the way out. The receptionist, the guests, felt like silent witnesses. That night, she didn't go home. She drove aimlessly until dawn, the headlights blurring through tears she hadn't let fall earlier. When she finally parked near the lake, she sat there for hours, staring at the still water. Mark called again and again. Dozens of missed calls, dozens of messages. She read none of them. By sunrise, she knew exactly what she had to do. When she finally went home the next evening, the house was cold and quiet. Mark was sitting on the couch, still in yesterday's clothes, eyes swollen from crying. "Claire," he said, standing quickly. "Please, I can explain." "You already did," she said quietly. "For weeks, every time you looked me in the eye." He stepped closer. "I made a mistake." "No," she cut him off. "You made choices, over and over. You chose lies. You chose her." He tried to reach for her, but she stepped back. "You know the worst part? I believed you'd never do this. I thought we were unbreakable. I thought love was enough." Her voice trembled, but didn't break. "It wasn't," she whispered. Then she handed him an envelope, her lawyer's card, and a printed photo of him and Isabella, time-stamped, undeniable. Mark sank onto the couch, silent. Claire turned toward the stairs, pausing only once. "You said you couldn't live without me," she said softly. "Now you'll have to learn how." She didn't look back. That night, she stayed at a small hotel across town. Ironically, not far from the one where she'd caught him. The irony made her sick, but she needed the distance. She stared at her phone as messages flooded in. The last one caught her eye. "I'm sorry, Claire." "Please, don't do anything you'll regret," she smiled bitterly. "You already did that for both of us," she whispered. Then she blocked his number. The first morning alone felt strange. The silence was too heavy, too clean. The house smelled like detergent and memories she didn't want anymore. Claire stood in the kitchen, staring at the empty mug Mark had used the night before. For years, that same cup had meant comfort. Now it just reminded her how easy it was for love to turn into habit. She started cleaning everything. Every room, every drawer. It wasn't about tidiness. It was about erasing him. By noon, she had packed 2 suitcases, one full of clothes, the other of documents and old photos. When she reached their wedding album, she hesitated. On one page, Mark was looking at her like she was his whole world. She tore the photo out, folded it in half, and threw it into the trash. Her phone buzzed again. Not from him this time, but from an unknown number. You really left him? It was Isabella. Claire stared at the screen for a long moment, pulse steady. Then she typed back, "Yes, you can have what's left." She hit send, turned the phone face down, and walked out to the balcony. The evening air was cold, the kind that made her lungs sting a little. It helped her think. The strange thing was, she didn't feel broken anymore. She felt awake. The sadness was still there, but underneath it was something sharper. Power. Control. The one thing Mark had stolen from her without realizing it. 2 weeks passed. The divorce papers were filed quietly, efficiently. Mark didn't fight them. He just signed and left a short note. "I'll never forgive myself." She read it once and shredded it. Word of their separation spread fast through their circle of friends. People called, texted, tried to ask what happened. Claire never told them. Let them make their own guesses. The truth was hers now, and hers alone. She found work again, started freelancing from a small apartment downtown. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers, the kind of place where she could leave dishes in the sink and nobody would care. Sometimes, late at night, she caught herself replaying memories. Their trips, their laughter, his voice saying goodnight. It hurt, but it also reminded her how human she still was. Betrayal hadn't turned her to stone. It had just made her careful. One evening, she stopped by a cafe near her new place. She was paying for coffee when she saw a familiar figure outside. Mark, standing by his car. He looked older, thinner, lost. Their eyes met for a brief second. He started to walk toward her, hesitation all over his face. Claire turned away. She didn't want an explanation. Not anymore. As she walked down the street, her phone vibrated. A new message from an unknown contact. The preview line read, "He's been calling me again. Says he misses you, Isabella." Claire didn't even open it. She deleted it instantly. For the first time, she felt sorry. Not for herself, but for the woman who still hadn't realized what she'd inherited. She whispered under her breath, "Good luck." A few nights later, she sat on her balcony watching the city lights. She poured herself a glass of wine, something she hadn't done in months. Her phone was silent. The air was cold, but peaceful. For the first time since the night she found that message, she didn't feel anger, just clarity. Some stories don't end with forgiveness. Some don't end with revenge. They just end quietly, with a choice to stop caring. She raised her glass slightly toward the skyline and murmured, "To endings." Then she smiled. Not because she was happy, but because she finally wasn't pretending anymore. Epilogue weeks later, Mark sent one final email. No subject line, no greeting, just a few words. "You were right. Love wasn't enough." She never replied. She didn't need to. She closed her laptop, turned off the lights, and let the silence fill the room. This time it didn't hurt. It felt earned. Top Reddit comments say things like, "Wow, that ending hit harder than I expected." She didn't need revenge. Her peace was enough. He lost the best thing he ever had. That quiet goodbye gave me chills. One of the most realistic endings I've ever read. Thanks for watching. Life doesn't always give closure, but it does teach lessons. Take care.